The soil was cold this morning. Margaret noticed it the way she noticed everything about growing things, not consciously, not in words, but in her hands, in the particular resistance of the earth as she pressed the seedling down with her thumb. Too cold. Early May, but the nights had been pulling back from spring, and the little rental garden that came with the cottage was fighting it the same way everything fought loss, which was stubbornly and without much grace. She had been out here since 5:30. The sky behind the oak was that particular color between dark and light that had no real name, just the feeling of being the only person awake in a city that was still deciding whether to begin. She was in her gardening clothes, the old canvas trousers her husband David had bought her the Christmas before he got sick, the ones she kept washing because they still fit, and she didn't want to think about why she kept them. She pressed the last seedling in, sat back on her heels. The garden was small, 12 feet by 9, hemmed in on 3 sides by someone else's fence, but she had made it hold more than it knew it could. Lavender at the border, climbing roses she'd coaxed around a frame she'd built herself out of salvaged wood, a small raised bed of herbs she'd started from seed on the kitchen windowsill because she needed something to tend through February, and February this year had been the kind of month that required a reason to get out of bed. She didn't look at the empty side of the raised bed. There was a second pair of gloves there, folded on the edge of the frame the way they'd always been. She hadn't moved them. She was going to move them. She had been going to move them for 6 weeks. Her phone buzzed on the flagstone step. She looked at it without picking it up, the way you look at things you already know the answer to. The email had come in at midnight. A law firm on behalf of a Daniel Ashworth. His estate, she looked up the address because she always looked up addresses before she accepted a job, was 12 miles east, just past the town of Harwick, a large property, private, a greenhouse that had been, he wrote, somewhat neglected. He was very particular about the words somewhat neglected. He read the email a second time. The money he was offering was more than she charged. She tried to think of a reason not to take it, the way she always tried to think of reasons not to take things lately, because accepting things meant the day was moving forward, and moving forward was still, on some mornings, harder than it looked. She couldn't think of a reason. She picked up the gloves, both pairs, without meaning to, and went inside to make coffee. She had been a master gardener for 22 years. Before that, she had been a biology teacher. And before that, she had been a girl who grew up in a house where her mother kept a garden so precise it looked like an argument with nature, and where Margaret had learned, by the age of 8, that there was a particular kind of order you could make with your hands that no one could take from you. She wasn't sentimental about plants. She knew what they needed, and she knew what they were doing. Not magic, not meaning, just chemistry and light, and the long, patient negotiation between a living thing and the world it found itself in. She had spent 2 decades telling clients this in the gentlest possible way, because people who hired gardeners were often sentimental about plants, and it was easier to work around that than through it. What she didn't tell clients, what she had only ever told David, was that she was sentimental about the act, the specific, unrepeatable act of a thing beginning to grow. It was not the same as being sentimental about a flower or a tree. It was something more like what she imagined religious people felt in churches, the sense of participating in a process so much older and larger than yourself that your own life temporarily organized itself into the correct proportions. She had needed that this year, more than she had needed most things. The jobs had kept coming, word of mouth mostly. She'd been operating without a website for 7 years, which meant every client was a referral, which meant every client came in with a specific kind of expectation. She was good. She was reliable. She was the sort of person who remembered, the following spring, exactly what she'd promised a garden would do, and who came back to see whether it had. She drove to Harwick in the morning right, the windows down, because it was the kind of May day that requires it, with the particular smell of the county going green after a long winter coming in off the hedgerows, something between grass and rain and the edge of something else, which was just living things doing what living things do. She told herself she was looking forward to it. She was. The estate was not what she expected. She had expected large. She had not expected this particular kind of large. The long gravel drive that opened suddenly onto a house that had clearly been built by someone with very specific ideas about what a house should be, which was beautiful and also somehow wrong, like a sentence in a language you almost spoke. The grounds were impeccable. She noticed that immediately. The care that had been taken with the lawns, the beds, the hedging. Someone had been working here for years, someone good. Then she saw the greenhouse. It was at the far end of the property, set slightly apart from the formal gardens, and it was different from everything else on the estate in the particular way that something is different when it has been let go. Not ruined. Nothing was broken, no glass was cracked, the structure was sound, but the interior was visible from 40 yards away, and what she saw through the glass was the slow, specific disorder of a space that had been alive and was now only technically living. Overgrown where it should have been pruned, pale where it should have been rich, the kind of garden that reminded her of a face after a long illness, still recognizable, but not quite itself. A man was waiting by the front door of the house. He was, she guessed, early 60s, the kind of lean that suggested someone who had once moved through the world with a great deal of energy and was now storing that energy somewhere she couldn't see. Well-dressed, in the specific way of someone who had long since thought thinking about it. He watched her pull up without changing his expression. "Margaret Calloway?" he said when she got out of the car. "Mr. Ashworth." He didn't offer to shake her hand, which she noted without offense. He looked toward the greenhouse and then back at her. "I should tell you that I won't be available to show you around the greenhouse myself. My estate manager, Paul, will give you access and show you whatever you need. You'll have complete latitude on the restoration, whatever you think is necessary." She waited. "Is there anything you'd like to ask me before we begin?" There was quite a lot she wanted to ask him. She asked none of it. "I'll take a look and give you my assessment in a few days," she said. "Is the greenhouse locked?" Something moved across his face, very quickly, not quite an expression. "Paul has the key," he said, and he went inside. Paul was a square, cheerful man of about 50, who had been managing the estate for 11 years, and who had, it became clear within the first 5 minutes, genuine affection for the property and genuine puzzlement about the greenhouse. "He's had 3 gardeners working on it in 4 years, Paul said, walking her across the lawn. Good ones, too. All of them worked from the outside. He asked them not to go in. Margaret looked at the greenhouse. Up close, the glass had a particular quality, old, original glass, wavy and imperfect, the kind that distorted what was inside just slightly, like looking through water. They worked from the outside? Through the vents mostly, watering, temperature management. He said he wanted the interior preserved, the original layout of the planting. No one was to move anything. Paul paused. He told me this morning that's changed. He wants it properly restored. You're the first person he's asked to go inside in 4 years." She stood at the door. The key was in the lock. "Do you know why?" she asked. Paul looked at the house, then at her. His wife built this garden from scratch. Every plant. Took her 6 years. She died in there. Heart attack 4 years ago, early morning. No one found her for a few hours. The key was cold in the lock. He hasn't been inside since the day she was found. Margaret pushed the door open. The smell came first, warm, green, alive, but threaded through with something older. Not decay, something more like memory. She stood in the doorway for a moment, not crossing the threshold, just breathing it. She went in. The greenhouse was 60 feet long and perhaps 20 wide, and it had been built with the kind of attention that meant someone had thought about more than plants. The structure itself was Victorian-influenced, cast iron and old glass, the ribs of it painted a dark green that had faded to a silvery sage. There were raised beds along both walls and a central path of clay-colored tile, and overhead, the canopy of what had once been a thriving collection was now a tangle of things that had been allowed to do exactly what they wanted for 4 years, which was not always what they were meant to do. She spent the first morning just walking and looking. She had a clipboard she didn't use. She made no notes. She went plant by plant, variety by variety, learning what was there before she made any decision about what to do with it. There were things here that took her breath away. A Medellina magnifica, the Philippine orchid, that had been allowed to cascade over its trellis in a way that was technically undisciplined and visually spectacular. Plumeria she hadn't seen outside of specialist collections, a corner devoted entirely to night-blooming species that would have required years of patient cultivation. Whoever had planted this had known what they were doing and had done it with a specific kind of love that was visible in the choices, not the choices of someone trying to impress, but of someone who had been genuinely, quietly astonished by what plants could be. On the 3rd day, she found the journal. It was under the potting bench, tucked between a bag of perlite and the wall, a spiral-bound notebook with a cracked green cover, the kind sold in any garden center, now bowed with age and the particular wavy texture of paper that has absorbed moisture over years. She almost didn't pick it up. It looked like a planting log, and planting logs were useful, but not unusual. She opened it. The handwriting was small and very neat, and the entries were dated, going back 7 years. Not just planting records, something more like a conversation with the plants or with herself or with someone who would read it later. Notes about why she had chosen a particular variety. Small observations about what was working and what wasn't, and why, and what she thought it meant. A pressed cutting of something unidentifiable taped to one page with a note beneath it. Found this at the back of the Veloso nursery. They didn't know what it was, neither do I. Planted it anyway. Margaret sat down on the old wooden stool by the bench. She read for a long time. On the 4th day, she began writing in it. She didn't think about it. She needed somewhere to record what she was seeing and what she was planning to do about it. And there was the journal on the bench, and there was a pencil in the gutter of it, where Elena, she knew the name now from the entries, had left one. She turned to the first blank page after the last entry, and she wrote the date and what she was looking at and what she thought it needed. She wrote, "The Medellina has been expressing itself freely for 4 years, and the question is whether to discipline it or simply create a framework that lets it be what it's become. I think the latter. Some things, when left to themselves, find a better shape than the one you would have chosen for them. She put the pencil down. She didn't think about what she'd written. There was work to do. Outside, without her knowledge, a man had come to stand at the glass. Daniel Ashworth had told himself on Monday morning that he was going to walk past the greenhouse on his way to the east gate and not look. He had been not looking at the greenhouse for 4 years. He was very good at it. It required a specific internal act of turning away that he had performed so many times it had become almost automatic. He looked. Through the old wavy glass, slightly distorted, a woman was moving in Elena's greenhouse with the same unhurried attention Elena had moved in Elena's greenhouse, bending to examine something at root level, sitting back on her heels, her hands doing the quiet, practiced thing that hands do when they know exactly what they are for. He stood there for longer than he meant to. He walked away before she turned. She had been there 10 days when they had their first real conversation. She had been leaving a preliminary report in the estate office, a single typed page, methodical, organized by bed and by species, with notes on what could be saved and what was beyond it, when she turned around and he was in the doorway. He was looking at the page in her hand, not at her. "The night blooming section," he said. "Can it be saved?" She handed him the report. "Mostly. The Cereus are resilient. They've been doing what they do, regardless of care. The moonflowers need more attention. I think with the right intervention, they'll come back." He read the page with the attention of someone looking for something specific. She spent 2 years on that corner, 2 winters getting the conditions right. "I know," Margaret said. "I can tell. The soil composition in that section is different from the rest of the greenhouse. She amended it specifically. It's part of why the plants are still viable." He looked up. "How do you know she amended it?" A small pause, a choice. "There are notes in a journal under the potting bench. I've been using it as a reference." Something moved across his face that she didn't have a name for yet. "I see," he said. "I can stop using it if you prefer." "No," he quickly said. "No, please continue." He set the report back on the desk and looked out the window in the direction of the greenhouse, though it wasn't visible from here. Elena would have wanted it used. It was the first time either of them had said her name. "I'll have the full assessment for you by Friday." He nodded. He was already somewhere else. He didn't go to the greenhouse that evening. He stood at the window of his study for a long time, watching the light change over the property, the particular gold of late afternoon over the glass roof of the greenhouse. And he thought about the word reference. She'd said she was using the journal as a reference. He thought about what Elena had written in it, not the planting records, the other parts, the conversations with herself, the pressed cuttings and the small specific joys and the observations that turned sometimes into something you would have to call philosophy. He had not been able to read it. He had not been able to do most things. He thought about a woman in a canvas hat sitting on the stool by the bench, reading his wife's handwriting. He could not decide how he felt about this. He went to bed before he figured it out, which was how he handled most things now. What happened next happened slowly, which was the only way anything real ever happened. He began, without acknowledging to himself that he was doing it, to time his morning walks to pass within sight of the greenhouse. He told himself it was because he wanted to monitor progress. He watched the progress of his own self-deception with the detached, mild interest of a man who has learned that there is no point fighting the things that are true. She was there every morning by 7:30. She worked without music, which surprised him. Most people needed noise. She worked in a particular rhythm that had its own internal logic, moving between tasks in a sequence he couldn't predict, but which, after a few days, he started to see the sense of. She was working the greenhouse the way Elena had worked it, not in the systematic sections a professional would choose, but following some instinct about what each plant needed most on any given day. He didn't know how to think about that. He knew because Paul told him that she had begun bringing lunch and eating it inside the greenhouse on the tile path near the central bed. He knew because he had looked that she had brought her own tools, a worn wooden-handled set in a canvas roll, the kind of tools you accumulated over decades, and that she kept them in a specific place on the potting bench, exactly where Elena had kept hers. He didn't know if she'd noticed that. He didn't know if she'd noticed a lot of things. She found a small label in Elena's handwriting tucked into the soil of the night blooming section. No botanical name, no instructions, just, "This one is just for joy." She left it where it was. The second conversation happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks in. She had been wrestling with the old irrigation line along the east wall. A section had clogged, and the tool she needed was in the estate shed, and she was coming back through the garden with it when she found Daniel standing in the kitchen garden, doing nothing in particular, in the way that people stand in outdoor spaces when they are thinking very hard and using the outdoors as cover for it. "The east irrigation is blocked," she said, because she had learned in 22 years of this work that the cleanest path through most awkward moments was straight through them. He almost smiled. Elena used to say that greenhouse had a particular acoustic quality, that she could hear everything from the south bed that happened anywhere inside. She's not wrong. There's something about the old glass. A silence. "Your husband," he said, and then stopped. She looked at him. "Paul mentioned, I apologize if it's all right. 18 months ago. His name was David. I'm sorry." "Yes," she said. Not because she couldn't think of anything else, but because yes was exactly true, and everything else would have been less so. He nodded once. He understood what she meant. She could see that he understood. 4 years, he said, not quite answering a question she hadn't asked. "Does it get easier?" she asked. She hadn't meant to ask it. She had not asked anyone this question in 18 months. He thought about it for a long time. She appreciated that he thought about it. "Different," he said finally. "It gets different. Whether that's easier depends on the day." She went to fix the irrigation. She thought about that word all afternoon. Different. She had spent 18 months looking for a word that was true. He gave her one. The night blooming section opened on a Tuesday. She didn't plan it. Plants don't ask permission. But she had been watching the Sirius for a week, reading the signs she had learned over decades to read. And she had stayed late that Tuesday because she knew. She made tea from the small travel kettle she'd started keeping on the potting bench, and she sat in the central path and she waited. At 9:17 in the evening, the first Sirius opened. It bloomed the way the Sirius always blooms, which is all at once and briefly and with a kind of furious beauty that makes you understand why someone would spend 2 years preparing the conditions for it. White, enormous, extravagant. The scent that came off it was the smell that happened when impossible things decided to be real. Margaret sat in the semi-darkness with her tea going cold and watched the flower open and thought about David, who had never seen a night-blooming cereus, who was on the list of people she was going to show one to. And she let herself feel that quietly, without apologizing for it. Then she wrote about it in the journal. She wrote the date, the time, the conditions, barometric pressure, temperature, humidity, and then she wrote, "There are 2 more buds on the lower stem that may open by Friday." Elena was right about the soil. Elena was right about everything in this corner. I keep finding notes she left that feel like letters, not meant for me specifically, but received. She put the pencil down. She turned back several pages, she wasn't sure why, and read, and that was when she saw it. Halfway down a page she had read before, she found an entry in Elena's handwriting, followed on the same line, without a break, by 3 sentences in her own. She had not noticed when she was writing them. She turned back further. There, another page where Elena's entry ended mid-thought and Margaret had continued it, not because she'd intended to, but because the thought was unfinished and her hand had known what the next thing was before her mind had caught up. She sat with this for a long time. She was sitting with it when she heard the greenhouse door open. Daniel stood in the doorway the way he had stood in the doorways of rooms for 4 years, present at the threshold, unable to cross it. The cereus were open. The smell reached him before anything else, and it was so specific and so known that he put his hand on the doorframe. Elena's smell, Elena's night, Elena's white flowers in the dark. Margaret stood up from the path. He was looking at the journal on the potting bench. Then he was looking at her. "I came to tell you the east light in the upper panels has been repaired," he said. His voice was very even. "I didn't think you'd still be here. I wanted to see the cereus open." He looked at the flowers. Something in him went very quiet and very still. "She waited for them every year. The first time they opened, she called me from inside the greenhouse at midnight. I was in a hotel in Singapore. She held the phone up so I could hear." Stopped. "So you could hear what?" She thought the silence of a room full of open flowers sounded different from any other silence. Margaret looked at the open cereus. "She was right," she said. He crossed the threshold. He walked to the potting bench and he picked up the journal. He opened it. He turned to the page where Elena's handwriting ended and Margaret's continued. She watched him read it. She watched him turn back, going page by page now, finding the other places. She hadn't counted them, but she knew there were 4 or 5, maybe more, where the 2 hands had blurred together in the journal's middle pages. His face did not change. This was, she was learning, a thing about him. His face very rarely changed. But his hands on the pages were not the hands of a man whose face was telling the truth. He stopped on a page near the end. He put his hand flat against the open page. And then, very quietly, without drama, without a sound, he sat down on the tile floor of the greenhouse. Just sat down. Margaret did not say anything. She did not move toward him. She understood in a way that her body understood before her mind did, that this was not a moment that required anything from her except presence. She sat down beside him, on the tile path, in the dark greenhouse with the white flowers open around them, and she did not touch him, and she did not speak, and she did not look at him. They sat there for a long time. At some point, she heard him take a breath that was not quite steady. "I can't tell," he said at last, his voice very quiet. "Where she ends and you begin." She didn't answer because she had nothing to say to that was not also true of herself. "This page," he said. He turned the journal so she could see it. Elena's entry 3/4 of the way down, ending mid-sentence. "The variegated jasmine on the east wall has reached the upper panel, and I think it will—" In Margaret's handwriting, completing the sentence without having known it was begun. "Reach the light it needs by spring." Margaret looked at it for a long time. "I didn't know," she said. "I was just—" She stopped. "I was writing in it the same way I was working in here. I wasn't thinking about who had been here before." "I know," he said. The Sirius were at their peak now. The smell was extraordinary. "Is this—" She looked for the right question. "Is this all right?" He held the journal in both hands, looking at the open page. "I don't know," he said. "I think so. I think—" His voice changed. "She would have liked you." Margaret felt something open quietly in her chest, like something that had been closed for a long time, remembering how to do it. "Tell me about her," she said. He looked up. "Please," she said. So he did. They sat on the tile floor of the greenhouse until well past midnight, while the Sirius held their bloom and the night held them, and he told her about Elena, and she told him about David, and neither of them said anything that wasn't true. She came back. She wasn't sure in the week that followed what she was coming back to, whether she was a gardener finishing a job or something that didn't have a name yet. She was not naive enough to mistake the intimacy of that night for something it might not be. Two widowed people in a greenhouse full of flowers that smelled like memory, talking about their dead. This was not necessarily the beginning of anything. It was possibly just grief recognizing itself across a... She came back. She wasn't sure in the week that followed what she was coming back to, whether she was a gardener finishing a job or something that didn't have a name yet. She was not naive enough to mistake the intimacy of that night for something it might not be. Two widowed people in a greenhouse full of flowers that smelled of memory, talking about their dead. This was not necessarily the beginning of anything. It was possibly just grief recognizing itself across a room. She kept working. This was what she knew how to do. The greenhouse was responding. She could feel it in the way she could always feel a garden turning, not dramatically, not suddenly, but in the specific quality of the light through the leaves, in the way the soil held moisture, in the small sounds and small signs that meant a living system was reorganizing itself toward what it was supposed to be. 6 months of work stretched ahead of her. She had never looked forward to 6 months before. She was looking forward to these. Daniel began coming to the greenhouse in the evenings. Not always, not according to any pattern she could predict, but sometimes at the end of the day, she would hear the door and he would be there. Not to speak, mostly, just to stand inside the space he had avoided for 4 years, getting used to it the way you got used to anything, which was by being in it long enough that it became, slowly, ordinary. She did not make a production of it. She continued what she was doing. She made 2 cups of tea if she'd made 1 before he arrived. He noticed that. He noticed her noticing that he noticed it, which was the specific, uncomfortable moment when things became real. One evening, he came earlier than usual and found her reading. The journal was in her hands. She was on the section she had not yet read, Elena's final entries, the weeks before she died. She looked up when she heard him, and they looked at each other in the particular way of people who have passed the point where the expression can stay carefully neutral. "I haven't read the last section," he said. "I know, neither have I. I was going to ask you whether you—" She stopped. He came and sat beside her, not on the floor this time, but on the old wooden bench along the center bed, and she gave him the journal, and he held it for a moment without opening it. "Together?" she said. He opened it. They read Elena's final entries together. He read more slowly than she did, and she waited at the bottom of each page until he was ready to turn it. The last entry was dated 3 days before Elena died. It was brief, a list of what needed doing in the spring, the jasmine on the east wall that still needed to reach the upper panel, a note about the serious buds she expected by April. And at the very end, in different ink, like a thought that had come later, "I have been thinking about what this garden is for. I built it for joy, mine first, and then whoever might tend it after me. I hope whoever comes next loves it the way I have. I hope they find it a good place." Daniel closed the journal. He held it in his lap. Neither of them spoke for a while. "She left it for you," he said. "Not to Margaret, exactly, more to the air." "She left it for whoever needed it," Margaret said. He turned and looked at her. He looked at her in the long way of someone who is actually seeing a person and not the idea of a person. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if the answer is no." "All right. Do you like it here?" The question was small. The question was enormous. "Yes," she said. It was the simplest thing she had said in 18 months. It was also the truest. 5 months passed the way months pass in a garden, in specific increments of change so small you missed them day by day, and then one morning you looked up and everything was different. The Medinea had been carefully guided onto a new framework that let it be magnificent without being chaotic. The moonflowers bloomed in 3 successive cycles. The variegated jasmine on the east wall reached the upper panel by March, which was 2 weeks ahead of Elena's estimate, and Margaret made a note of this in the journal in the matter-of-fact tone of someone keeping a record for a reader who would be interested. She had stopped pretending she didn't know who that reader was. They had a rhythm now, the 3 of them, Margaret and Daniel and Elena's garden. It did not look like anything she would have recognized before, because it wasn't like anything she had known before. Daniel worked alongside her some days, doing the less skilled work, moving compost and carrying water, with the specific application of someone who needed to be useful and had found, late, a form of usefulness that gave him something back. He was learning, slowly, what she was teaching him without explicitly teaching. She watched him begin to look at a plant and ask what it needed, rather than what it looked like. Watched him develop, without his knowing it, the beginning of a gardener's eye. She told him what she thought this meant. He didn't answer. He was embarrassed by it in the specific way of people who are moved by something they consider impractical. She found this extremely endearing. One afternoon in March, she came in from an errand to find him reading the journal. Not Elena's entries, hers. He didn't put it down when she came in, which meant he had heard her come in and decided to let her see him reading it. This was a deliberate act. She understood it as the deliberate act it was. "The Medinea entry," he said without looking up. "What about it?" "You wrote, 'Some things, when left to themselves, find a better shape than the one you would have chosen for them.'" He closed the journal. "When you wrote that, were you writing about the plant?" A long pause. "I was writing about the plant and also about some other things." He set the journal down carefully in the exact place on the potting bench where she had found it that first day. He was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that I have been trying to figure out for several months how to say something that I don't have good language for." "That's all right. Take your time." And she went back to the jazz. 5 months passed the way months pass in a garden, in specific increments of change so small you missed them day by day. And then one morning you looked up and everything was different. The metanilla had been carefully guided onto a new framework that let it be magnificent without being chaotic. The moonflowers bloomed in 3 successive cycles. The variegated jasmine on the east wall reached the upper panel by March, which was 2 weeks ahead of Elena's estimate, and Margaret made a note of this in the journal, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone keeping a record for a reader who would be interested. She had stopped pretending she didn't know who that reader was. They had a rhythm now, the 3 of them, Margaret and Daniel and Elena's garden. It did not look like anything she would have recognized before because it wasn't like anything she had known before. Daniel worked alongside her some days, doing the less skilled work, moving compost and carrying water, with the specific application of someone who needed to be useful and had found late a form of usefulness that gave him something back. He was learning slowly what she was teaching him without explicitly teaching. She watched him begin to look at a plant and ask what it needed rather than what it looked like. Watched him develop, without his knowing it, the beginning of a gardener's eye. She told him what she thought this meant. He didn't answer. He was embarrassed by it in the specific way of people who are moved by something they consider impractical. She found this extremely endearing. One afternoon in March, she came in from an errand to find him reading the journal. Not Elena's entries, hers. He didn't put it down when she came in, which meant he had heard her come in and decided to let her see him reading it. This was a deliberate act. She understood it as the deliberate act it was. "The metanilla entry," he said, without looking up. "What about it?" "You wrote, 'Some things, when left to themselves, find a better shape than the one you would have chosen for them.'" He closed the journal. "When you wrote that, were you writing about the plant?" A long pause. "I was writing about the plant and also about some other things." He set the journal down carefully in the exact place on the potting bench where she had found it that first day. He was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that I have been trying to figure out for several months how to say something that I don't have good language for." "That's all right," she said. "Take your time." And she went back to the jasmine and she let him take his time, because she had learned, it had taken her most of her life, but she had learned that the right words came at their own pace, and the best thing you could do was be in the room when they arrived. The greenhouse bloomed fully for the first time in a decade in the second week of April. It did not bloom at once, that was not how things bloomed, but over the course of a single weekend, the last of the reluctant species came into flower, and by Sunday morning, the greenhouse was what Elena had spent 6 years building it toward, which was the specific kind of beautiful that looks inevitable, the way all hard-won things look inevitable after the work is done. Margaret arrived early that Sunday. She stood in the doorway for a moment, exactly as she had stood in the doorway on the first morning, and breathed it in. Then she went to the potting bench and made tea and waited because she knew he would come. He came at 8 o'clock. He stopped in the doorway. She watched him see it, watched the greenhouse he had not been able to look at directly for 4 years settle around him, no longer terrible, no longer absent, just itself, full and alive and blooming. He stood there for a long time. Then he came in and walked to the bench and picked up his tea and stood beside her. They looked at the greenhouse together. "She'd have had opinions about the jasmine," he said. "I know. It went a little far to the left. I'm going to guide it back in autumn." "She'd have wanted to guide it herself." "Probably." A pause. "She'd have been right." He looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," he said. It was not a large-voiced thank you. It was the specific kind of thank you that means something that cannot be fully said, which was why it was said quietly. "You're welcome." "There's a thing I've been meaning to say for—" He stopped. "A few months, apparently." She waited. "The job ends next month. The restoration, technically. You'll have done what I hired you to do." "I know." "I've been wondering," he said carefully, "whether you might consider an ongoing arrangement." "What sort of arrangement?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know exactly. I don't have the language for it yet." He looked at her. "But I know that this greenhouse is alive again because you're in it. I know that I come to this greenhouse now because you're in it. I know that the last several months have been the first months in 4 years that have felt like—" He stopped. "Like something I want to continue." She looked at the open flowers. She looked at her hands. She put her hand on the potting bench. He put his hand over hers. Not moving, just there. Outside, April was doing what April does, which is make everything possible again, without asking permission.
Margaret went home that evening to her rental cottage and her small garden, and stood at the raised bed in the last of the light. The second pair of gloves was still on the edge of the frame. She looked at them for a moment. Then she picked them up, both pairs, and carried them inside and put them in the drawer in the kitchen where the garden tools lived, folded together. Not gone, not discarded, just put somewhere they could be still. She made 1 cup of coffee. She stood at the window with it, looking at the garden in the evening light, the lavender and the climbing roses, and the raised bed that had made it through another winter. She thought about the word different. She thought about a greenhouse full of open flowers and a man's hand on hers, and 4 years of silence that had needed 6 months of presence to begin to end. She thought about Elena's last entry. "I hope whoever comes next loves it the way I have. I hope they find it a good place." She finished her coffee. She went to bed. She slept for the first time in a long time without waking.
There's a particular kind of love that doesn't arrive with music. It arrives the way spring arrives, slowly, without announcement, in the specific fact of something green pushing up through cold soil that had no business being warm yet. You don't fall into it. You tend it, the way Margaret tended the greenhouse, without quite knowing what you're growing, until the morning you walk in and it has bloomed while you weren't watching. If you have ever found yourself in a place that needed something only you could give it, tell us about it in the comments. It doesn't have to be a garden. It could be a kitchen, a classroom, A room you walked into and understood before anyone explained it to you? We'd love to know.